throughout its 3-decade-long history, the Need for Speed series hasn't typically been associated with arcades. But despite this, several games in the series have received arcade conversions, including Hot Pursuit 2 in 2003, Underground in 2006, and Carbon in 2008. And for a while, these were the only Need for Speed games to be released in arcades. That was until 2023, when a new arcade entry was released titled Need for Speed Heat Takedown. It was developed by Adrenaline Amusements, a company that specializes in arcade games based on popular franchises, such as Crossy Road, Tomb Raider, and Hot Wheels. Just like the previous Need for Speed arcade games, Heat Takedown is based on PC hardware, which makes it pretty easy to run on a regular computer. So let's see how well they adapted Need for Speed Heat as an arcade game. The game gives you 5 cars to choose from: a Ford GT, Corvette C7 Grand Sport, Porsche 911 GT2 RS, Lamborghini Aventador S, and a Nissan GTR, all of which are taken from the main version of Heat. Each car has different stats for top speed, acceleration, and nitro, as well as 6 different visual customizations with different body kits and liveries. The game also uses a camera to take photos of players that are shown in-game, though I didn't have a webcam to try it myself. The game itself takes place in a championship called the Pro Cup, where you compete in 5 races carried over from the original Heat: Winx, Ocean Drive, Cross Mountains, Axiom, and Tumbler. The actual order of the races is random each time you play, but it's always on the same 5 layouts. You get points based on your finishing position in each race, and the player with the highest amount of points at the end wins the championship. In terms of actual gameplay, you race against 7 AI opponents, or optionally up to 3 other players in multiplayer on the arcade cabinet. The car physics were redone to be significantly less weighty than the original game, and while that does make driving easier, I think it's more acceptable in an arcade setting, especially on the deluxe cabinet, which has moving seats. The cars have nitro you can use by pressing the dedicated nitro button, and it refills by itself over time. All the tracks have ramps you can drive off of to avoid obstacles like trucks or roadblocks. They're a different type of ramp than the ones in the original game, and you can refill your nitro bar by going off of one. But the most unique gameplay mechanic is also the one this game is named after: the takedowns. Similar to how they function in Burnout, you can perform a takedown on opponents by hitting them with enough force. Police pursuits return from the original, and in order to escape, you need to last long enough without being taken down by the police. If you fail to do this, you get busted and have to wait a short amount of time before continuing the race. It's certainly a much simpler system than before, but again, it helps streamline the gameplay in an arcade. The cops also have redone voice lines to match the more straightforward chases.
Chase ongoing. We have a target. Officer down!
The races have time limits similar to other arcade games, but as far as I can tell, they're only enabled when the first car finishes the race. And if you're playing against AI, you'll likely never encounter the time limit at all, since the AI cars are programmed to never be too far ahead of you. And this game is honestly pretty easy in general. I only lost 1 race during typical gameplay, and there are no difficulty settings that I know of. Instead of the original game's day and night system, all races in this version take place at night, including Cross Mountains, which was originally a daytime race. In general, I think Takedown does a good job setting itself apart from the main game. In fact, it was made in a completely different game engine, being developed in Unity as opposed to Frostbite for the original. And while it doesn't look completely identical, Takedown comes pretty close and keeps the overall atmosphere intact. On top of that, instead of just reusing licensed music from Heat, this version actually has its own composed soundtrack. It might not be the most memorable, but it's far from what I'd call bad. The game even has an announcer, with lines spoken both in the menus and during races.
Lamborghini Aventador S. Make some noise, Palm City! Use your nitrous. Player 1 is leading.
It certainly gives this game some personality, which is pretty important for an arcade racer. One interesting thing to note is that while I was looking through the game files, I found a voice line that mentions over 35 dream cars, which is unused in the game itself.
Over 35 dream cars.
I couldn't find anything specifically mentioning any unused cars, but if this audio is anything to go off of, there could have been a lot more content planned for this game. And I honestly think that's one of its biggest shortcomings. The 5 cars you choose from at the start are all you get, and there are no performance upgrades or really anything to work towards. You never get to choose what track you race on either. You just race wherever the game decides to send you. And despite the races being part of a championship, you actually need to pay to continue after each individual race even if you win, while other games give you a free play for winning even outside of championships. That might be due to the low difficulty I mentioned earlier, but it comes off as weirdly greedy regardless. And speaking of difficulty, I'm not even sure you're expected to lose the championship, since after finishing all 5 races, the same cutscene with fireworks plays out no matter what. As much as I think this game is well polished, it still feels a bit rushed and very shallow in content, even compared to arcade racers from a while ago. It's not outright bad or anything, I just don't think it has enough depth to warrant playing more than a few times, since at that point, you've pretty much seen everything. Need for Speed Heat Takedown is certainly one of the more interesting games in the series. While I appreciate its overall polish and presentation, it doesn't have much that justifies playing it repeatedly. It's a perfectly competent game, but it's hard for me to recommend playing it more than once or twice, since there's really not much to see afterwards. It might be worth trying out if you see it at an arcade, but if you stop playing after a few minutes, just know that you're not missing out on much.